Urbanization began to unfold during the Gilded Age, taking place between 1878 and 1887. Although it was a step forward in the developing identity of the U.S. as an individualized nation, the drawbacks of the social and political corruptions far outweighed the benefits of the newly established technologies and cultural benefits. Poor living conditions and low sanitation and housing proved to be a negative effect on urbanization. Tenements, although very small, would house multiple families in one building. These tenements were poorly kept up due to the neglect of the landlords and the government. These cramped apartments were also home to multiple festering diseases, such as cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis. These tenements lacked both heating and proper plumbing and were being occupied by the low-income class citizens and immigrants. One particular type of these apartments were dumbbell tenements. These were particularly popular because they did not require elevators. They were only 5 stories high, making them cheaper and easier to build, and were also connected by a long hall in the front and back. During this time, the labor conditions for workers were dangerous, and their wages were insufficient. There were no safety regulations enforced locally or by the state. Injuries were common and insurance was rare, yet the victim of the incident was forced to prove the fault was not their own negligence and often couldn't to obtain liability claims. Women began to work more during this time, but it was the wealthy and middle-class women who could stay home. Poor women and children went to work to keep their family alive. Income being more important than education, these children would never get the education they deserved. Political machines such as Tammany Hall took over and began to control cities through their use of graft, which is the illegal use of political influence for their own personal gain. The corrupt politician William M. Tweed was in charge of running Tammany Hall and used his power as the boss to influence courts, law enforcement, granting contracts, and employment. The Tweed Ring was the group of politicians under Tweed's leadership who stole between $40 and $200 million. Such robber barons were a harmful influence on the industry, for they took more money away from the already suffering economy. Despite the vast corruption during this period, there were also advances in technology and new cultural prosperity. With the new innovations in architecture, the skyscraper in the 1880s, elevators soon became a necessity and were required for buildings 6 stories or higher. By using a steel frame, William LeBaron Jenn was able to build the world's first skyscraper at 10 stories in Chicago. The city of Detroit was the first to use the tower system of street lighting, where 122 towers lighted 21 square miles, thus giving a new light to nightlife. In the 1880s, the American Telephone and Telegraph Company was introduced, making communication a national network. Indoor plumbing gave a new comfort to the way of life, and the wealthy acquired their own water systems in their mansions that replaced the steam system for control and added comfort. New forms of entertainment developed during this time, benefiting the country as a whole. Theaters, circuses, new music genres, and amusement parks all became large attractions for the American public. An event such as the opera was leisure for the upper class who could afford the experience. Although P.T. Barnum's three-ring circus had been around since the middle of the Reconstruction days, it continued to thrive as the greatest show on earth. The first parade was held in New York City in 1882 to honor Labor Day. Not only did this serve as an occasion for the whole population, regardless of their social class, it was an official recognition of labor being a central and national issue. The music evolution during this time served the country as a whole, developing styles apart from Europe. This increase of American wealth and success provoked the desire to try new things during their free time and further advance society. New philosophies developed during the Gilded Age, one of the most important being the Puritan work ethic. The Puritans believed that hard work was an honor to God, which would lead to a prosperous reward. The unity of their community strengthened to work ethic, as well as their belief that the Bible provided a strict plan for the living, deemed by God himself. During the Gilded Age, there was not only a desire for new religious philosophies, but also a development of new social reforms. The social gospel of the time pushed for the government's aid in social reforms. Their most important contribution came from Jane Addams in her introduction of the settlement houses. She witnessed their success in the slums of London and brought the idea over to Chicago. Her involvement gave way for reforms to help the growing, less fortunate population. With opportunities such as access to education and free or low-cost housing and health care, their livelihood was protected from poverty. The Gilded Age brought forth a time of struggle between the social classes, along with benefits that remain to this day. Elevators and telephone companies are not enough to overlook the struggles and corruption of this time. After a dangerous day at work, families would have to go home to crowded apartments, where the threat of disease always lingered. Although philosophies such as the respectful Puritan work ethic and the social gospel worked hard to help the needy, their lives were still being controlled by a corrupted higher power, stealing the money they deserved but would never get their hands on. While the Gilded Age brought forth leisure for the wealthy, the agony of the ever-growing poor population wasn't worth the time and money spent to please the wealthy and transition from rural to urban lifestyles.